Hello.
How very nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. Um, well, this is the coaching collaboration team.
It is, yeah. This is where we come to collab.
Yeah. um, I suppose we should talk about why we set it up. Really? Go on then.
Yeah. Why did we set it up?
Yeah.
Because so what is the coaching collaborative? It's the idea of getting people who do coaching together, talking about it, talking about their experiences, talking about their learning, talking about what could make them better coaches effectively. I think that's the key thing. And seeing it as a process to learn from each other
Yeah.
and share learning opportunities.
Yeah. And we discussed how we like to make it this particular podcast quite broad, taking on board all kinds of coaching, because there's so much we can learn from other fields, not just education. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas originally we first talked about effectively educoaches and using it as a basis of coaching in education. But what we found was through our different experiences and through our different, even though we're both in education, we don't necessarily always coach within an education background or within an education context. I have a particular interest in coaching in nature and using more of a spiritual approach to coaching, whereas you have a very different approach to what I do as well, but we both have similar things as well.
Yeah.
We both use values-based coaching, and we both use Myers-Briggs type indicator as a basis of that, and that specifically the leadership coaching. So I think it was that idea that there are all these different elements to coaching, which makes it a really exciting field, but it also then makes it sometimes feel like a minefield to coach.
Yeah,
And
I
you can
see it. Yeah, I see it kind of like there's two sides to that. Like with educational coaches, with education in particular, we can be a bit stuck in a bubble and not let anything in. And you kind of like going round and round inside that bubble. And then when you're looking at other types of coaching, because it's not part of what you're used to, it's like you say, it's completely wow, there's so much, I don't know where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think also, depending on what we go through each as coaches, in our own lives, will also affect how we want to use coaching in our lives and with others. We've both, had a loss this year. We've both experienced grief this year. We've both experienced different things with our health over the recent years as well. And I think those elements have added to the dimensions of what we coach about as well.
Yeah, and we're both parents. I think that has a huge dimension, doesn't it? Actually, coaching has probably helped quite a bit. Yeah, I'd say coaching's had a huge impact on me being a parent. So, and how I parent. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I would absolutely agree with that. So I
Mm.
think it's kind of like, as we've explored coaching from a professional education point of view, and then brought in our personal lives, and we've been friends for 10 years, long time.
Yeah.
So it's those elements that we've gone actually expanding and developing as a coach isn't just about reading a book or developing our practice. It's who we are as people and who we are developing as people as well.
Yeah, and I think that's I suppose as former teachers, that's what's attracted us to coaching, because in that sense, as a teacher, I taught for 20 years, and the type of teacher I was at the beginning compared to the end was very different, and just went through a whole life change in those 20 years, which had an impact on my teaching. And that's very similar to coaching in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. And it is transformational, isn't it? And I think because certainly in teaching, because it's such a structured process, you know, we start in September, we finish in July, we have, you know, we often forget that actually what occurs over that, you know, 12 months, even though it might look and feel very similar to the previous 12 months, it's actually amazing what happens to us in that time frame.
Yeah.
And how much we change in that time frame. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that gives, I suppose that's a small indicator of what brought us to coaching in the first place, but could you give more detail on what got you into coaching?
Yeah, do you know what? It's always been something that I've been interested in before I even became a teacher. So my family had a leadership development company, and a lot of what they did had coaching as an element of it. And I was very lucky enough to have conversations with, you know, some really experienced leadership development people, and coaching practitioners. And it was through that I've always been interested in coaching, always been interested in leadership development. And actually, it was very early on in my career as a teacher that I moved into teaching teachers, effectively,
Yeah.
and used coaching as a basis of it. But I probably didn't articulate it as such. I didn't say that it was coaching as such.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't the language within education at that point. You know,
Yeah.
coaching was very much for private sector and for you know, people that are organizational development. It wasn't seen as something that we did with each other as teachers or as leaders within a education background. It was something that we may have done with children, although I would probably beg to differ that we probably don't coach children as well as what we think we might do.
Yeah.
But it was then, as I moved more into management and more into development of programs, I worked on the Subject Learning Coach program, which was the DFE funded program for the Teaching and Learning Change program, and coaching was very integral to that. And I got a coaching certificate, and it really spiraled from there. So that would have been 2008. It's probably when I first really saw myself as a coach and moved on through that coaching trajectory.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's probably around 2008 that I heard about it. And the school I was working at had earmarked me to become an assessment for learning coach. And I did some training around that. But where it and I can totally resonate with what you're saying with where I didn't have the language for it, but it's what I was doing unofficially. And this was when I became an assistant principal at a new school, and I was responsible for a humanities faculty where every single member of the team was a new teacher. They were either, and it was like every T under the sun. It was like a teach first, a TFT first year, TFT second year, two of each, OTT, NQT, GTP, all the P's, all the T's. I had them all. Like the most experienced member was a year, had been teaching a year. So I had 6 of these. And I thought, if I mentor every single one of them, I'm going to be dead by Christmas. So I started using a different way, which is started off mentoring, but slowly, which I realize now was coaching, giving them more, asking them more questions. What do you think you could do? What do you think? Well, what would you suggest? That sort of thing, which, like I say, I realize now was coaching. And it meant that within a year, they could do my job, basically. They were like really confident, and some of them did go on to do my job at other schools. So I got a real kick out of that. And so I started looking into it in more detail. And through leadership courses where I was getting part of the leadership course was I needed to have a coach, which was my line manager, who was amazing. She was fantastic. She was a great role model. And so she started coaching me, and it was a bit odd at first. Because normally she was my line manager and just told me what to do. But this was more like, well, what do you think? And I kind of liked it, because it's I like saying what I think. And and in my first maternity leave, I did some free courses over the summer, and then in my second maternity, well, before I had my second child, I went to a new school where I introduced coaching culture and started training people within school in coaching skills, and completely transformed the way they did observations and ran teaching practices and so on. And so when I went on my second maternity leave, that's when I did my level 7 in coaching and mentoring. And decided actually this is what I want to do now, because the biggest kick I get is out of developing people and seeing how they grow and how far they can go and how empowered they feel. It's a real beast.
It is, as a teacher, we talk about the light bulbs going on with children, but actually it's just as special for teachers and other and adults. And I think it's one of the things that we forget as teachers moving to training, is that feeling is still important.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of being a coach, I think for me the biggest learning curve has been of my own self-awareness, and I think that's so important as a coach, being aware of your own I can't say the word. Idiosyncrasies.
Your little things.
Little things. Little things like that you don't use in a coaching session. Just little things that becoming more aware. I mean, I it's a joke in my house that I don't have a poker face. But in a coaching session, sometimes you really do need to have a poker face. You can't go, what are you saying?
You can.
You can, but not with that face.
Not with your face, no. I think it's one of those things where I think I also trained into play therapy as well. So I'm a play practitioner. And I think it's that unconditional positive regard that is something that you develop as a play practitioner. And that applies to the coaching as well, is that, okay, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me right now, but actually through that questioning process, and sometimes challenging process, we can find out, A, what was meant, or B, if that is their understanding, and whether the coachee has the self-awareness of the impact of what they've just said as well. Which I think is so incredibly important.
And I think it's about judgments as well, being aware of your own biases, and whether it's conscious or unconscious. I'm not sure there is such thing as unconscious bias, to be fair, but that's a whole different session. I think a lot of bias is conscious, and there's degrees of consciousness, but I think it's accepting and admitting it. I think none of us like to think that we're prejudiced. None of us like to think that we're judgmental, but we're all human, and we all have it on some level, and just being aware of that.
I think again, it comes back to that self-awareness, isn't it?
Mm.
It's only unconscious if you're not aware of it. But once you're aware of it, it's what you do with it then, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
excuse it as being unconscious bias because now you are conscious of it.
Exactly.
So it's what you then do with it, I think, is the key thing, and that's when you work out, is it actually prejudice, or was it just ignorance, or was it just, I didn't even know that was something I was doing or saying, or my understanding of what I was doing or was saying didn't come from what you perceive it to be. It actually came from something completely different. But it's about being able to have those conversations,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And being able to articulate why something is what it is for you.
Yeah.
But it's then what you do with it.
Yeah.
Always.
And
it's what you do with it.
Yeah, and it's being aware of your own baggage. What are you bringing to the table? Do you have a massive suitcase of issues going on there yourself? Where are you bringing that in to the coaching session? Are you dismissing because you never had experienced that? Or it's something that you could never understand? We all have our own privileges. So it's being aware of that as well.
I think there's also, it's not necessarily baggage that you bring in and judge people. It's sometimes you don't have a context of it, and potentially there's a fear of challenging somebody because you don't have a context of it, or a fear of asking a question for fear of being seen in a certain way. And I think we actually move into, depending on who we are and how open we are and how self-aware we are, it's whether we can say, well, I'm going to ask that question, and I know it's going to seem that I'm ignorant, or I'm going to ask that question because I don't know the answer, and I find it interesting and curious. And I think in some ways we've stopped being curious for fear.
Yeah. I think, well, I think this idea of cancel culture that's kind of seeped into lots of areas. And whereas before, I don't know, before people would ask the question, I think it's more a case of people want to ask the question now, but the fear is there that they're going to get shot down. And then it's going to get out there that perhaps they're prejudiced or they're ignorant or whatever, instead of celebrating the fact that actually you're asking the question, and that's good. Because how we're supposed to learn.
And I think that was exactly it from a coaching point of view. It took me a long time to say that I was a coach, and it was a long time for me to feel confident in my coaching, because it's that fear of asking questions. There was something stopping me of asking questions, and ultimately that's what a coach is. You ask questions. And it's that feeling of, oh, well, I should know that. And as a professional, certainly at a certain level within education, there is a feeling of, well, I should know that, or I should certainly at least pretend I know that, because other people will find out that I'm a fraud. Whereas as a coach, it's actually your job to ask the question, because it's not whether you understand it, it's whether the person that you're talking to, your coachee, understands it.
I think that's the greatest difference from being a teacher to a coach, and it's something that I always say to trainees that are training coaching, which is, as a teacher, you tend to ask questions that you know the answer to. I hope so. We hope. But as a coach, if you know the answer, are you leading? You have to question whether you are leading that coachee down a certain road. You might not be, but if you know all the answers, you have to question whether, are you leading why are you asking that question? Is that the right question right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a lot of food for thought. It is quite interesting, especially when you are, I mean, both of us are really into personality styles, into Myers-Briggs, and it's interesting when you're coaching someone that has a completely different personality style to yourself or leadership style. And I think the most difficult early coaching session I had was coaching someone that had a job title that I used to have. So they were head of teaching and learning. And it was like I had to constantly sit on my hands or gag myself and going, yeah, what you want to do, what you want to do is, and just go, anytime I was going, what could you do? I probably sounded slightly like an alien or something, but it was just forcing myself to ask the question rather than to give advice. Because and I think that the Michael Bungay video and the book he's written on The Advice Monster, I think is fantastic. Because that's something that we love giving advice, don't we? And I've realized that, I've realized that's about our own egos.
It can be. It absolutely can be. But it can also be a caring. I care about you. I want to help you. And again, in education, there's a lot of us that are like that. We really genuinely want to help people. And we know that certainly in education, people are time poor. There isn't a lot of time to do things. So ultimately, I'm helping you by giving you advice, and you're welcome. It's really it's the approach.
But I think it's and that's the mind shift for educators, is when you're saying to them, okay, that's short-term gain, but in the long term you're going to be burnt out. You've got all these all this staff. Was it Steve Jobs that said, why hire people if you're going to tell them what to do? It's you hired them for a purpose because they're fantastic, they're incredible, so let them come up with the ideas themselves. Let them tell you.
And trust is always a big issue. And again, in the education sector, that there is a general issue with trust. We have Ofsted, we have all these different things.
It's very judging, monitoring, scrutiny, all those kind of horrible words. That isn't about learning and development.
And effectively runs counter to what you and I are trying to do within learning and development and within coaching as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Coaching Collaborative this week, and we look forward to you joining us next time.
You can engage and connect with us on Twitter at CoachingCollab1 or on Mastodon #TheCoachingCollaborative. Bye.